It's funny, we talked to we just spent some time talking with our worship team this morning about how could our transitions on and off the stage be a little bit smoother. Did you guys hear the big bang a second ago? That was me, yeah. So lead by example, right? That was great. Yeah, not embarrassing. I picked this thing up and the bottom just like, wow, So, well, welcome to church again, and we're so glad that you are with us. And man, we're coming to the end of something that we've been in for the last 2 weeks that I don't know. It doesn't really matter if you've been here for all of it or not, because it's all going to kind of coalesce this morning in something that I think can wrap everything that we've talked about together. And we've titled this series Expedition 1. And I told you guys that we're actually getting ready to start what we're going to call here at the church as expedition groups. And we'll talk about those again this morning, kind of in detail. But I said if you've ever been a part of a small group, let me show of hands. Who in here has been a part of a small group before? Anybody familiar? Okay, hands down. Anybody familiar with missional community language? Anybody growing up around that? Got a couple people around that? Yep. Missional community language. I said it's both of those and it's neither of those at the same time. And I promise you it's not just so we can be trendy or whatever. I actually have a reason in this. And I told you guys that this is like a big commitment. This is a big thing. Look around our church, and we're new, and this is kind of part of it. But we don't have a lot of different ministries, right? We don't have like bikers over, biker women over 75 outreach ministry here at the church. We don't do that here at the church. And or I think I said clowns, injured on the job. We don't have an outreach to that group here. And it isn't that those things might not be really good things. And there may be a day when we do have, the biker ladies over 75 outreach ministry here at the outpost. But I just said that man, you have to continue to feed and take care of the monster that you create, right? And we kind of get this option as a new church plant, that we get to start ministries and do things that matter and that fall under our vision and our mission. And we want to make sure that the things that we start are actually really good things. Because at the end of the day, I'm asking 2 hours out of your weekly. Who's got an extra 2 to give out of the week? Anybody? I didn't think so, right? I don't have an extra 2 hours to give. This is going to be a sacrifice for me and for my family. It's Sunday nights is when our group is going to meet. And dude, Sunday nights, that's typically a mad dash to get the house clean. Anybody else? Just don't make me feel bad up here. Is anybody else? Sunday is your day. You got weekend house, and it's okay, I can't go back into the week with the house looking like this. And so we scramble and we get it all cleaned up, and we, maybe do a little bit of meal prepping and just try to get our heads together. Right? That's Sunday nights. And I'm giving it up. And I'm actually asking a whole other group of people to meet at my house at 5:30 and give that time up as well. And I told you that if I'm going to do that, then I have to be really certain. And this thing, one of two things. It either has to be just flat out called out in Scripture that you have to do this, or you really need to do or engage in this thing, or it has to be critical to the formation of our church and to our ability to reach our one in the city, right? It's got to hit one or both of those marks. And I told you that our expedition groups they actually hit both of those. And we've kind of been talking about that. And we're gonna dive back into what we've talked about a little bit more. But I wanted to talk about why we call them expedition groups. Rolls off the tongue, right? No, not at all. Actually, and if you've had a conversation with me over the last year, as I have talked about our expedition groups, what typically happens is I'll say something. I'll say our small groups, and I'll be well, okay, not small groups, expedition, and I have to correct myself. And there's actually a purpose in this, right? There's a purpose in choosing expedition groups, and I promise you, it's more than just because we're trying to be trendy or something like that, right? That's at the end of the day, that's the least of it. But there's actually a reason that we've called them expedition groups, and in a reason that it doesn't just roll off the tongue, right? And so if you'll give me just a second, humor me, I'll explain why that is. So let's just pretend for a second that I went on an expedition this last week, right? I went to an outpost, and we're going on an expedition to climb Mount Rainier. Let's just say that, right? And So I go to the outpost, and I don't have the gear I need, and so they outfit me with shoes, spikes, crampons, ropes, harnesses, coats, and everything that I need to be able to climb to the top of Mount Rainier. And then they don't just equip me; they train me. We go outside as a group, and there's a bunch of us that are going to climb Mount Rainier together, and they show us how to do it. And we're doing belaying training, we're doing glissade training, we're doing self-arrest training. We're all these things, and if you're part of that world, then you know some of those terms, right? That's what we're doing, right? And then it's time to go on the expedition. And so then we go inside, and we all get a cup of coffee, and we sit around the fireplace, and then we go home. Was that an expedition? No, it wasn't, right? It was just a bunch of people that did something for nothing, and then they sat around the fireplace, and then they went home. An expedition begs the fact that we actually have purpose, and we're going somewhere, and we're doing something, right? And maybe that's an expedition just to reach the summit of Mount Rainier. Or maybe that's a rescue expedition, right? There's some little girl lost in the big forest, and so we gather up, and we equip everyone with radios and vests and safety equipment, and then we train them, and this is how you're going to do this, and then we send them out, and they go out on this expedition to rescue this little girl that's lost in the woods. Maybe we're mapping something previously unknown. Maybe it's an expedition to the Antarctic, right? We've never been to the South Pole. I know that we have, but just hear me, right? I've never been there before, and so we gather up, and this team of people, and we equip them and train them, we send them out, and they have a purpose and a focus, right? And this is why we've chosen the name expedition. It sort of works with the outpost, and so in that sense it is a little bit trendy, I guess. But beyond that, I wanted it to convey that it wasn't just a small group of people, right? Because you can have a small group of people that sit around the poker table, right? You can have a small group of people that play online video games together, or a small group of people that sing in barbershop quartets or whatever. A small group of people can do all sorts of things that really don't have any end goal or end purpose beyond just the amusement of that group. And yet, I wanted our expedition groups to actually be going somewhere. See, an expedition has a purpose and focused intentionality. This is it. We're the outpost, right? If you didn't know, welcome to the outpost this morning. But we are the outpost. This is why we have adopted this name. Because every week we want to take this moment to be this place of equipping and training as we send people out, right? So what is an outpost? Well, it's the first place you visit before an expedition into the wilderness, right? But it's also the first place you come to out of the wilderness for rest and refuge. And we want that. We want this space to be that on the weekly. But during the week and in our expedition groups especially, we're going to see how that's going to work today, right? We're going somewhere. We have focus and we have intentionality. And we're moving towards that together in a group, right? So this means that our expedition groups, right, because this is what our series has been on, they're going to have a mission that they're going to be going after. This is the purpose and focus of our expedition groups, right? Man, we've talked about one another's. We've talked about living out the gospel in community with one another, and this is a real thing. We really want to experience it, but actually it goes beyond just that. It has these little groups of 10 to 12, maybe 14 at the most, people that are going to meet together week in and week out. They have a purpose, and they have intentionality and focus, and they're actually going after something. This is the reason that they're going to be together. And I want to end on this, right? Because I don't want you to think, I don't want you to be sold short on what these groups are, and then you show up and it's something else, right? But actually, from the very beginning, I want to let you know that we're headed somewhere in these groups, and this is what we're doing, right? But to completely understand how that's going to work, I want to go back and just briefly touch on what we've talked about for the last 2 weeks, because I've told you sort of a half-truth over the last 2 weeks. Both weeks, I've told you sort of a half-truth, and that would become a lie if I didn't come in and fill out the rest of the information. Everybody good with that? Sort of it was a half-truth on hold. And so I'm coming in to fill out the rest of the information for you today. And so I want to go back, and I want to look at week 1 of this study. Week 1, we looked at the cultural value of rugged individualism. We looked at our idols. It's John Wayne, right? It's Batman. It's Lone Ranger. It's these self-made, millionaires, billionaires. It's the self-made man that pulled himself up by his bootstraps. He went out west, right? He made a name for himself. Whatever the case is, this sort of rugged individualism has come to define our culture. And in some ways, it's absolutely a good thing, right? Like it teaches some things that I believe are consistent with what the Bible tells us, right? Like it's good in a lot of ways, but the bad thing is that we've somehow conflated that mentality in with how we view church. And I've said that we've actually made church a very individualistic sort of activity. And that's a bad thing, right? Because week in and week out, we can walk in here, we sit in rows, and like you may be sitting right behind or right beside somebody who you don't even know their name, right? I mean, just look around the room for a second, right? I asked you guys at the beginning of the series to like look around the room and pick out somebody, like how many people in here could you tell me some things about them and about their life that you couldn't pick up by just standing in their driveway or just a brief walk through their house, right? Like how many people in this room, like just, and here's the deal, the people in this room, they come here every week, or most of you guys come here every week, and so maybe you've been sitting in front of or behind or beside that person for weeks now, maybe even months, and yet, like, they might not be one of those people that you could know anything else more about their life than say, if you just walk through their house. And so the problem is we've conflated this sort of rugged individualism into our faith, and so now faith is about, like, personal Bible study, right? Anybody, like quiet times? Is this a big thing that's emphasized in our church culture nowadays? Dude, absolutely. Come on, man. This is huge in our church culture now. It's like we have multiple companies pumping out resources quicker than you can consume them that are directed towards your ability to just like sit down and just have you and Jesus time, right? And that isn't a bad thing. That isn't a bad thing, right? That's actually a really good thing, but the problem is it's become the fullest expression of our faith. It's become the only thing. It's my prayer time. It's even the Sunday morning worship gathering, right? Is like something that you can do as an individual. I said, man, this isn't how we were made. Week 1, I told you, man, we went back to the Garden of Eden and we said, man, that it's not good for man to be alone. It isn't that it's not okay that man is single, right? It's typically how we read that. Man is single, and then God creates him a wife, and so then we sort of read that as like, well, it's not good for man to be single. But that isn't actually what was going on there. At the end of the day, what was happening in that was like, no, it's not good that man would be alone without relationships, because we are created in the image of a relational God. It just so happens that the fullest and clearest expression of that is a spouse, right? And so we see that sort of picture from the beginning. But man, we were created to live in close community with one another. And if we live without that, like we talked about some of the nasty things that come out of that, right? Division, like the disharmony and the lack of unity in churches and what that has produced. I mean, we see it outside our four walls, right? Is there any division in the country that we live in? Yay, nay? Yeah? A few shaking heads on that? Yeah, the problem is like over the last year and a half, 2 years, like we've not seen anything different inside the church in that. We've seen those same exact things come in, and it's this lack of unity, lack of harmony, right? I totally like went off the rails there on my notes, right? So that's where we went, week 1. What I didn't tell you in that is how we got to that place. What is it that led us to conflate, that is to mix two ideas together that shouldn't really be mixed together? And that is that strong cultural value of rugged individualism into this activity of church, such that now we say that we go to church. Can I just tell you that that's not anywhere in the Bible? You don't go to church. Church is a group of people that you belong to and that you're doing life with, right? That is all over the Bible. But we've conflated these two ideas. But I didn't tell you how we got to that. And I think to fill in the rest of that and really make today make sense, we need to talk about that for just a second. And I think it has to do with two varying views of the gospel and of heaven and earth, right? I want you to tell me if you've seen this picture before. And please don't make fun of me for my drawing, because it's going to be so bad. So here's you over here, and this is earth or whatever, and there's heaven. God, right? And there's this divide, right? So anybody will fill in what the divide is in between here? Very good. You have seen this. I knew it. I knew you had seen it. Right? And then what goes in here? What goes over the divide? Anybody seen this picture? John Cross, dude, you guys are so good. And again, I drew this earlier this week, and it came out atrocious. Not better today, right? And so, anybody seen this, right? Anybody seen this picture? Yeah, we've seen this. And like, so when we talk about and we share the idea of the gospel with people, is this what we focus on? Yeah? Is that wrong? No, it's not wrong, actually. It's actually at the heart and its center of the gospel, but I would assert that it's kind of an incomplete picture. You see, what we think is this, right? We have earth, we have heaven, and one day, you're going to die, and there's going to be a little tombstone with your name on it. And so, what we want to do is we want to help people make the jump, right? We want to help people get to heaven, and again, is that wrong? No, not really, but it's entirely incomplete. Actually, that's not the story that the Bible paints. Do you know that going to heaven when you die one day, you know how many times that's mentioned in the New Testament? 4. And actually, the last of those 4 is a stretch. Like, it's really a good solid 3. This isn't the picture. It isn't wrong. But it's actually so incomplete and so anemic of a view that it's hard to call it right in that sense as well. Let me draw something a little different. And so if you've been around for a little bit, then this isn't new to you, so don't spoil the surprise and all that. What we see in the beginning of the Bible, page 1, is we see God creates the heavens and the earth. And actually, those aren't two different spaces. God's here. He walks in the garden in the cool of the day with his people. It's beauty, it's shalom, rest, right? It's God's kingdom sort of overlapped and on top of man's kingdom. Right? It's earth, right? And it isn't even man's kingdom and God's kingdom. That's just the vestiges of that old kind of way to see this that are still alive in me, right? But it isn't man's kingdom, God's kingdom. It's like, man, there's this shared kingdom at which we have purpose, we have work, we have something to do with our Creator, and we enjoy doing that together, perfect harmony, perfect relationships, face to face with our Creator and God. This was the picture at the beginning of the Bible. And then 3 pages in, we break it, right? And then what happens is all of a sudden these two spaces are kind of different spaces. God kicks us out of the garden. He says, no, this is my space, right? Places swords at the entrance to it, and all of a sudden now we're not able to go into this space, right? How does the end of the Bible, let's even just miss all the stuff in the middle. How's the end of the Bible? How does that work? Right? Revelation 21, 22. You might know what happens. Is it just this thing gets destroyed and then we just all fly off to here? Is that how it ends? It's not how it ends, actually. Actually, God makes it really clear, especially just if you look at the first 3 chapters of the book, that he cares a lot about this place. Then he made you. And he went through a lot of trouble to make you for this place and to make this place for you and to sustain life and to bring about goodness and blessing through this place. And the story of the Bible and the ultimate story of the gospel actually is how this space is coming back to invade this space. If you read the end of the Bible, where do we end up? What does heaven even look like? You ever thought about that? If you ever tried to think about what is some ethereal sort of sing-along in the skies or smoke? I just picture some dry ice fog along the ground all the time. And it's you know why that's so hard for us to understand? Because we're not disembodied spiritual beings. We can't conceive of a place like that. Actually, at the end of the story, you have a renewed body, a renewed mind, a renewed everything, a renewed earth. It's this place that we were created for, and God is coming back to remake and renew this place. And the end of the story is about how heaven comes and just completely consumes and overtakes the earth. And in these two spaces that were once one and then broken are now brought back together. Everybody tracking on that, right? But there's something that happens in the middle, and it is a cross, but it kind of works. Man, my crosses are bad. I guess I should probably get better at that. I'm like a preacher, man. So, anyways, there is a cross in the middle of this, but what happens is like God's kingdom isn't based on like borders, right? We think of that, and you guys have heard me say that numerous times. God's kingdom isn't based on borders. It's really, this is just for the drawing here, right? God's kingdom is anywhere that the rule and the reign of the king extends fully. And through the cross, through Jesus, through the gospel, guess what, man? It now extends to some of you. Little groups of us, man. Just drawing some hydrogen atoms up there, right? It now extends here. In these little pockets of God's kingdom of heaven, right, that are present here and now on earth. Let me read you something. This is Paul's view, and I think it really encapsulates this larger view of the gospel. Here's what it says. This is Colossians chapter 1, verses 13 through 20. It says, "For he rescued us from the domain of darkness and transferred us into the kingdom of his beloved Son." Right now, so that could be the whole jump the gap thing, right? Everybody tracking that? It's like it's there. It's there. There is a jump across there. "In whom we have redemption, the forgiveness of sins," right? This is a big part of this, my sin and my brokenness, right? "For he is the image of the invisible God," it's talking about Jesus, "the firstborn of all creation." And then this thing blows out and goes cosmic, y'all. Listen to this. "For by him, by Jesus, all things were created, both in the heavens and on earth, visible and invisible." I love how they're just like invisible things out there, right? Whether it's thrones or dominions or rulers or authority, all things have been created through him and for him. He is before all things, and in him all things hold together. He is also the head, the body, the church, and he is the beginning, the firstborn from the dead, so that he himself will come to have first place in everything. Right? Check this next part out. "For it was the Father's good pleasure for all the fullness to dwell in him, and through him to reconcile all things to himself." And underline, circle, highlight that, whatever you need to do, right? To reconcile all things to himself, having made peace through the blood of his cross. Through him, I say, whether things on earth or things in heaven. Man, I can't stress that all things enough to you, right? We have sort of shrunk down the gospel to where it is now just about my justification before God. It is who cleanses me. And here's the deal. Don't miss this. Absolutely true, central to the gospel. But man, if we have so reduced the gospel down to that, then we miss some really big things, like all things in this verse. Because it isn't just me. It's my relationships. It's my work. It's rest. It's justice. It's our broken bodies. It's this messed up creation that is like breaking down at every turn. All things. He is coming back to reconcile, to make new, to consume all things back to himself, not just me. And if you were to catch up with Jesus on any given day, it wasn't just, and keyword being just, about personal salvation. Jesus primarily saw things in much grander kingdom terms, where all of creation is being reconciled back to him. Man, you know the early Christians, they were like persecuted really hard by the Romans, right? Do you know why that is? It wasn't because of their worship practices, right? Like, I'm trying to be crude or crass or anything, but they incorporated some pretty nasty and devious acts into their worship services, right? Like, I'll just leave that to your imagination, but there essentially wasn't anything off limits when it came to like how you worshiped, right? It wasn't how the Christians worshiped. Can we just agree on that for just a second? It also wasn't who you believed absolved you of your sins. Get this, man. The Romans could care less who you believed absolved you of your sins and justified you and made you right before God, right? They didn't care about any of that. Here's a really good example of what set the Christians at odds with the early Roman world. This is Acts chapter 17, verses 6 and 7. He says, when they did not find them, they began dragging Jason and some of the brethren before the city authorities, shouting, "These men who have upset the world," right? So just backstory, there's some conflict going on in the city. Paul and his companions are kind of right at the dead center of it, which is pretty typical of Paul, right? He's stirring up some problems. And so they drag some people that have been known associates of Paul and some people that are accusing Paul and all this. They all kind of come together and they start talking about Paul and why it is and what they've done that has so disrupted the world here, actually, as they've said, right? And Jason had welcomed them, right? And here's what it says, right? Jason has welcomed them, and they all act contrary to the decrees of Caesar, saying that there is another king, Jesus. This is what set the Christians at odds with the rest of the world. They didn't care how you worshiped. They didn't care who you believed absolved you of your sins and justified you, right? They didn't care that you believed in faith. They didn't care that you didn't go to the temples. Man, there were some factions that had issues with some of the stuff that they did, but overall, from the government point of view, it was the fact that these people legitimately believed there was another kingdom coming, and they served this king in the here and now in some really tangible ways that showed that they didn't just hold to this really small view of this sort of me and Jesus view of the gospel, that it was worldwide, man, that this thing, it touched everything. I told you guys a story a few weeks ago about how the Christians were they were serving the poor. And they were there's a story about a province in northern Rome that the Christians had eradicated the orphan crisis there. They couldn't figure out why they would do that. Why would these Christians, do you know why? Because they had this massive view of the gospel that said, man, I have been adopted, right? And I didn't do anything to earn this. And so why shouldn't I go on to continue to do this? So they did, man. They ended the orphan crisis in one of the northern provinces of Rome in about 250 AD. The Roman government did a study to try to figure out how much they would have to pay the local pagan priests to do the type of altruistic work, benevolent work for the poor, the sick, the needy, the widow, the orphan in the kingdom. And you know what they found out? They found out that it would bankrupt the empire of Rome if they had to pay these pagan priests to do what the Christians were doing naturally. Dude, they got this massive part. It was justice. It was transformed relationships. And the Romans didn't care who you thought justified you or made you right? They were caring for the sick, meeting needs. And so this is it. This is what set them at odds. They preached and they believed in this kingdom where all of these things existed, and they lived in submission to its king in the here and now. And when they were asked, why do you do that? Well, because we serve another king. We have another kingdom, man, and this is how he commands us to live. And it's the most backward things ever. We should they weren't bad citizens. In fact, they were the best citizens. And yet, man, the Roman government, they couldn't stand for this. They couldn't stand that their allegiance to another king and another kingdom would drive them to such bold actions, self-giving, loving actions, loving one another. Right? They couldn't stand that, because what happens if that king, he sort of gets a wild hair one day and decides that he wants to go to war with Rome? Y'all, this isn't a people group you want to mess with. You hear Paul? To die is Christ, to live as Christ and to die is gain, right? And Paul, we're going to beat you to death, man. And it's well, hey, man, I count it all joy to share in the present sufferings with Christ, right? You can't rattle somebody like that. What happens if this group of people, these Christians, decide to stir an uprising there in Rome? They've been nothing but good citizens, and they would tell you that, right? As they're lighting them on fire. But we can't have this sort of thing happening here in our kingdom. Their allegiance isn't to Caesar. That was the reality of the early church, and yet somehow we have reduced the gospel down to just what it means about me and my own sort of personal justification, me and my sins, me and my walk with Jesus. The sort of me and Jesus gospel. But here's the deal: we didn't get there overnight, right? The problem is that this whole me and Jesus theology is all around us. Listen to this, man. She's author Amy Sherman. She did a study of the top 127 most popular worship songs. So this is like 127 most popular worship songs that would be sang in any given church in America. And her team took those songs and they rated them 1 to 4. 1 being the very me and Jesus is about me and how I feel. It's about my justification, my whatever, right? And number 4 being this much expanded like kingdom theology. Like, dude, the gospel touches every aspect of my life and of our culture and all this. That would be number 4. So they rated these 127 songs somewhere between 1 and 4, and they averaged them all together. Anybody want to take a stab at what the average of those songs were? 1.57. Did I put it on there? Dude, that was really good, by the way. Yeah, 1.57. That was the average score, skewed towards the me and Jesus theology. Listen to this quote from her book. She says, contemporary Christian music, CCM, right, assiduously avoids telling the full truth about life, the human condition, and our fallenness. If we fail to tell the truth about our human condition, which actually requires some nastiness and messiness to convey, and it is not at all that inspirational. We will be unable, right? So if we can't tell like the fullness of our human condition and all of its nastiness and messiness, right, then we'll be unable to fully explore the riches and depth of the gospel, which is about restoring all that unraveled in the fall. God isn't just working an act of redemption for our souls. God is also working an act of redemption for our relationships, work, rest, justice, even the physical space around us. Ultimately, anything that is broken. And here's the deal. And as such, our mission as agents of redemption isn't just geared towards the souls of men, but it is worked out in all the ways in which God's kingdom is invading earth. This thing is rolling over the earth one day. And it means a few things for everything, actually. And to live in this kingdom with this full view of the gospel, this isn't a works-based gospel. Like, don't hear me wrong in this. It isn't like you have to do all these things. No. It's like if we have a full picture of what the gospel means, then we realize that it means that it touches all of these things. Right? It is with this full picture of the gospel in hand that we are most effective at engaging in the mission of Jesus to make disciples of all the nations. Let me show you what I mean. Some of you guys have heard my environmentalist spiel before. I'm gonna give it again because I am not very creative. So here it is. All right. So you have somebody that's let's say they're an environmentalist and they care a lot. Global warming is a thing, and like, dude, the ice caps are melting, or whatever the case is, right? And this is real. Like, there's some very legitimate concerns about this. But the problem is they look at the Christian faith, and they see, and this isn't all our fault, right? This is kind of back and forth. They see something that's like anti-science, one. They see something that's at odds with the fact that we should care about our creation. And so they immediately see this isn't compatible with me and what I care about. What's the reality, right? Go back to page 1 and 2. What's the reality? I mean, nobody should care about our environment more than us, right? God isn't throwing this place away. Like, no, He put us here as gardeners, as stewards of this place. Like, we should care more than anybody about what happens to this place. And not engaging in things that really just line the pockets of corrupt businesses or politicians, but no, actually like seeking out real solutions to real problems and engaging things that affect the physical world around us. Why is that? Because one day in God's new creation, He is going to fix all these things. And if we're going to live in that kingdom one day fully, like, we're invited to live there now and begin to affect these things in how we live our life now. So man, how many missed conversations with the environmentalists have there been? Because we don't come to them and say, man, you're absolutely right. Did you care about something that He cares a lot about? He cares a lot about this place. He's actually died, and he's coming back, and he's going to reconcile this place, and it's going to be a new place. Perfect, devoid of all those things, right? And you get to participate in the building of that kingdom in the here and now. You know, what's funny is if you've ever watched those documentaries and stuff that talk about, environmental issues. Me and Jack, we watched Seaspiracy the other day. You may have seen that on Netflix. And it's about like all the trash in the ocean and all that stuff. And Jack, he's really into all that and save the sea creatures and whatnot. And so we watched this thing. It was a Seaspiracy. And it was kind of the end result of this thing is that it's fishing vessels that are putting all this trash in the water. And they talked to all these different scientists and like, here's the things that would have to change to fix this and fix this and fix this. And at the end of the show, right, every one of them, and this isn't just this one, but every one of these that I've watched, at the end of the show, they say, man, if something is really going to be done, something has to fundamentally change in the hearts of human beings. Y'all, dude, that's low-hanging fruit, man. like who can change that? Like, who's the only one? What is the only power capable of changing that? Dude, it's the gospel. You're absolutely right, man. We need to stand toe-to-toe with the environmentalists and say, you're absolutely right. Something has to change in the hearts and minds of people if we're gonna fix this, if we're gonna actually solve this problem. And guess what? The only thing that has the power to do that is, then it's the gospel. So let me share with you about that. So, man, with this full picture of the gospel, and it isn't just that. There's 1,000 other things, right, that this applies to, but it isn't just that. But with this full picture of the gospel, man, I feel like we're more equipped to walk into the world and reach people that are far from Jesus when we have a full picture. Everybody agree with that? Everybody pretty good with that? All right? So that was last week. 2 weeks ago. Let's talk about last week. Last week we talked about the Great Commandment. What's the Great Commandment? Remember? You can talk in church. It's cool. Love God. Love people, right? Love God and love your neighbor as yourself. Matthew 22:37-40 says it this, right? You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind. This is the great and foremost commandment, Jesus says. The second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. On these two commandments depend the whole law and the prophets. We said that love isn't just a feeling. It isn't just an emotion, something that we have about people. It's action, right? This is love. I gave you an example, right? Because the Bible gives us all of these examples of how to live out this love for our neighbor in these things called, anybody remember? One another statements. Yes, from the back. You got it. All right, these one another statements, right? I'm going to have to start getting you guys some like notes or some handouts or something. So here it is. 1 Peter 4:9. Here's an example of one of the one another statements. Be hospitable to one another without complaint. You guys remember that, right? Here's the deal. I told you last week, I don't care how hard you try, that without complaint part makes that almost impossible to fake, right? Like you can't fake that. If you're faking that and you're like, is that really being loving? Is that following this command here to be hospitable without complaint? I already told you guys at the beginning of this. Sunday nights, 5:30, we're scrambling, right? And so there are some weeks when other stuff has happened earlier in the weekend that like I'm not going to be hospitable without complaint, right? Now, here's the deal. I'm not going to like be nasty or anything, but that may be what's going on inside of me. It's like, dude, we are so busy with us, but we got people showing up in an hour, right? How can you like just white knuckle it and just like pull yourself up and just try harder and do better at that? Anybody? You figured that out yet? No, man. Like we said that if that kind of love is going to emanate from us, that's why the first part of that great commandment is what it is, to love God, right? Is that, man, we have to have experienced the love of Jesus through the gospel. It has to be just like welling up and overflowing in our lives, and then it flows out sideways into our personal relationships, right? And so here's the deal. That's where we went last week. I'm going to take a little bit of a left turn, and then we're going to close things out. Let's talk about Israel for just a second. And this is how these two sort of concepts mesh together. So big view of the gospel, big picture, loving our neighbor, right? Big good with that? Those are two things. We're gonna mesh these things together. And it has a lot to do with Israel. Because God originally gave those commands to love God and love your neighbor to Israel. And it wasn't just that. He gave them like 613 different commands. Actually, some of them are weird if we just want to be honest about it. There's a whole chapter on mold, Leviticus, I think like 14 or something like that. Right? It's just the mold chapter, right? Anybody read the mold chapter and you're like going through your year through a Bible and you're like, what the heck is this about, right? Or how about the fact that like you weren't allowed to process the crops at the edge of your field? Or if you were like picking up your crops and you were transporting them to like a cart and like you put it in the cart but you dropped some on the ground, you weren't allowed to go back and pick up the crops. Like why in the world would God care about that, right? Why would God care about farming techniques? Here's the deal. I had one more actually. Oh yeah. This is important. Sorry, we're gonna go back and talk about oxes that gore people, right? Because what happens in those days if you have an ox that gets out and it goes and it mauls your neighbor and it kills your neighbor, right? Well, luckily the Bible has something for us on that. Is that anybody like have to go there for something like that? Man, anybody got some ox that like you're turning to Leviticus to find out what to do if they get out and kill your neighbor? Right? You know, like what in the world does that stuff have to do with us, right? Here's what God was doing in all those commands, right? Just get ready for it because it's going to blow your minds. Ready? God was making Israel different from all the other nations around her. I know that's wildly profound, right? He's making them different. Crops at the edge of the field? No other nation was doing that, right? No, wait, every other nation in Israel's day, it was a scarcity mindset. Every single thing you have, you need to bring it. You know what crops at the edge of your field does? Man, that is the poor, homeless, the orphan, the widow. They're allowed to come in and they glean from that. And if you drop something, dude, like they can come in and they can pick that up. You have enough. If you're dropping crops as you put them in your cart, you've got enough, right? For you and your family. Don't go back and pick that up because there's people among you, the foreigner, the widow, the orphan, the poor person. They need to come in. They need to be able to eat. And in God's kingdom, everyone is taken care of. Everyone has dignity. Everyone has respect. Right? No other nation cared about upholding justice, about whose cow got out and did something to somebody else, right? But in God's kingdom, there's justice. There's retributive justice. There's restorative justice. We see concepts of justice that we're only just now beginning to get in the 21st century, right? And we see them present back in Israel's day, that God is doing something and making a statement about what justice in His kingdom looks like as opposed to all the other kingdoms. Mold? Y'all ready for this? I want to just like make your next time you read the mold chapter good. Here's the deal about mold, right? Because I just want to geek out for a second. Here's the deal about mold is Israel was coming out of a dry, arid place, and they were about to go inhabit a place that was a seafaring country, and water or moisture blows inland, and they get molds in their house. And as maybe some of you guys know, some of those can be really dangerous. Any of our military guys go stay at the D before? See the black mold over there? Oh yeah, man. If you know, you know on that. But that stuff can be really dangerous, right? And here's the deal. You know what pagan priests and places of worship would do? They would say, man, that's a blight. The gods have put that there. You've done something wrong, and they're punishing you now. And God says, man, I ain't punishing you. You got mold in your house. Scrape the spackle off and like quarantine it for 7 days and come back and take a look at it. Like, I care for you. I care for every aspect of your well-being and your health. It wasn't so. Here's the point in all of this, man. We see it explained in Isaiah 42, verse 6. Look at the last part of it. He says, and I will appoint you as a covenant to the people, as a light to the nations. 49, verse 6 says this. It says, is it too small a thing that you should be my servant to raise up the tribes of Judah and to restore preserved ones of Israel? I will also make you a light of the nations. Here's how Jesus says it, right, in His day. Matthew 5, 14 and 16. He says, you are the light of the world. A city set on a hill cannot be hidden, nor does anyone light a lamp and put it under a basket, but on the lampstand, and it gives light to all who are in the house. Let your light shine before men in such a way that they may see your good works and glorify your Father who is in heaven. People are drawn to a light. Think about a city on a hill in a dark countryside. There's nothing else around. It's nighttime, and you don't travel at night in Jesus' day because that's where thieves and robbers are. Like the city on a hill, that's the place that everyone converges. Do you know why the early church was so effective at reaching people? It wasn't their incredible evangelism strategies, right? Wasn't that? They weren't like knocking on doors or like handing out flyers. They weren't like whatever, whatever method we've sort of applied to it now. Do you know why they were so effective? It's because they were irresistible. They were an irresistible community of people defined by their love for one another, truly living it out. I told you last week, man, do you know why we got pretty much every book after the book of Acts? It's because they were failing to love one another or to love God well. These New Testament authors are writing in and they're saying, hey, don't do that. Don't treat each other this way. Don't sue one another, right? Like here's how you love one another well, and here's how you live this out. Why do you think Paul cared about their love and unity? It wasn't just for the sake of love and unity. It was because, man, without this, they're not an irresistible community of God's kingdom people. We're not marching into the world with some truth that we just need to convey a little bit better so that people will believe it. That's not the mission. The mission is to live out this love for one another and love for the Father in such a way that, man, our community of people becomes absolutely irresistible. We're inviting people to join a kingdom movement here on earth, active now. We do this in 3 ways. We're going to close things out. I think number 1, we do this through seeing the full picture of the gospel. Right? We sort of talked about that. Right? It's not just the me and Jesus thing. And the implications of that is that church isn't a place you go to, it's people you belong to. And we said that this place, this Sunday morning gathering, it has a purpose. Right? It is corporate worship. It is corporate time in the Word together. It has a purpose, right? But we also said that like you can come here for years and still never be in real, true community with other people. And so we're gonna start these expedition groups. Because in a group of 10 to 12, just like Jesus had, man. Jesus had the masses, but he also had this little group of 12 people that he walked around with day in and day out. And his conversations with them were different. In the depth in which he dove into their life, and they related to one another and loved one. It was different than in the masses. And so I said we're going to participate in that as a church. That we're going to allow a full picture of the gospel, destroy this individualism, and we're going to let it equip us with what I believe to be a much more robust picture of how the gospel is coming to reconcile all things. So that's number 1. We have to hold that in hand. If we settle for the me and Jesus thing, then we're going to miss some really important aspects of what it means to be the church. Number 2 is we have to develop communities of love as we practice the one another's of Scripture. So as we come together, we actually have to love one another, right? And how do we do that? Well, it's by pointing people back to the gospel, right? Because that's the only thing that has the power to help us love one another well. So I told you I'm going to be like notoriously uncreative when it comes to developing the questions for these things. That every week at some point, I'm going to point our eyes back to the gospel and allow us to talk about how, like, us coming back and submitting to the gospel again drives us to love one another, to love our community, right? To serve, to worship, whatever, well, right? But then number 3, and this is the one that we haven't talked about, is that I think we do this by displaying the kingdom of God through our mission work and inviting people to join this irresistible kingdom, right? If we have so lived out and have become this irresistible group of people through the way that we love one another, the way that needs are met, then no one goes hungry, no one is sad, nobody's walking in anxiety or depression alone, nobody has, right, unmet needs. We are truly loving one another because love is an action, right? And we're living this out. We're irresistible, right? And then we go on mission. There's a story in the book of Acts, chapter 19, at Ephesus. You've probably heard of the book of Ephesians. But Paul and his contemporaries, they were at Ephesus for a while. And Ephesus was actually unique. It was home to one of the 7 ancient wonders of the world, the temple to Artemis. And so some of you guys, I've talked about this about a year ago, so it's missed a lot of you. So I'm going to go back into it really quick. They think a meteorite had actually landed there in Ephesus at some point, and they had built a temple around this thing. It was one of 7 wonders of the ancient world. In fact, a large portion of their economy was built on this. And then a few people start coming to faith. There's also a really bad problem with like sorcery and witchcraft there in Ephesus. And these people start coming out of this life. It's Acts chapter 19. You can check this out, read it for yourself. They start coming out of this, and then they start reaching their friends. because they know these people. They're on mission to this specific group of people, right? They are loving. They know how to love them. They know what they're looking for. Just like the environmentalist example, right? They know exactly what this person is searching for, and they know how this grand view of the gospel fits into what their heart is longing for. And more people come, and more people come. And all of a sudden now, all these Ephesian Christians, they get together and they start doing a book burning, right? Like not in a bad way. They actually start burning their magic books. They have like all these books that teach them how to do witchcraft and sorcery and all this stuff. And they burn them, and it actually gives us the total of this, and it's 50,000 pieces of silver is what it says. 50,000 drachmas is what we think. And a drachma is about a day's wage. So somebody want to do the math? Got their phone out? What's 50,000 divided by 365? How many years worth of wages is that? 50,000 divided by 365. How many years? 100 and something. 136.9. So 137 years. 137 years, y'all. We're talking, in today's equivalent, millions of dollars. They single-handedly disrupted the economy of Ephesus. The silversmith guild that worked there at the Temple of Artemis are freaking out because they're worried that their trade is going to come into disrepute, man, because nobody's buying the little temple gods anymore. These guys are they've destroyed our livelihood as they've come in, and they've completely upended the economy of Ephesus, man, as people have come to know Jesus. We can miss some of that. I think we can miss sort of the significance of that story because it's we don't have a lot of witchcraft and stuff like that in today. Well, I guess we do, but it doesn't. We're not burning witchcraft books in the streets or anything like that, right? So let me update this to a story about something that actually happened not too far north of here. There's a community of people, a church network up there that is really sold out on this missional idea. And I'm not exactly sure which one. I could probably get you the name of it if you give me a little bit of time. But there was a school there in Tacoma that one of the high schools that had a football team that 75% of the young men who played on that football team didn't have fathers in the picture. In fact, a lot of the people in this one particular missional community, group of 12 to 15 people that were meeting together, a lot of the men that were in that group had been in that same demographic and went to that same school, lived there their entire lives. They grew up and they said, "Yep, that was me growing up." Father those guys, man, and the all the issues that go along with that, lack of attendance at college, the percentage of those guys that are finding their way into the prison system and all that stuff, it was commensurate with that, with that, right? So this group of guys said, "No, man, we're on mission." With a big view of the gospel, that God is a father to the fatherless, that he's doing what that means, big implications about that, social implications in justice about this, implications in met needs, and all that means, the gospel as it touches this. And so they went in and they started being a father to this football team. They come together and they raise money to buy them school clothes, pay their way to football camps, pay for their gear. They throw these amazing coach appreciation dinners where they come together with their coaches and they say, "Man, we are behind you. We want to help you mentor and love and lead these young men into success." They've served the families, moms, single moms with other kids that are struggling to make it in this community of people, because they had this area of holy discontent around this issue. And you know what's happened, man? People have come to faith in droves out of that. Just changed some things. The book that talks about this, man, they talk about the amazing sweeping changes that have come, not just to that school, but the whole little community that school was in. Dude, God's kingdom brought to reality in the here and now, as people have a full picture of the gospel and genuine love for one another, moving into the community to meet needs and to bring the kingdom. And so here's the deal. I told you guys from the beginning, this is where it all concludes, is that our expedition groups are going somewhere. I don't know where that is. I'm going to actually leave that to you, because here's the deal. We've done some things in the past, and they sort of reflect me, right? And that's good to an extent, but it needs to reflect you as well. I'll give you a few things that we've done in the past. Last year, about this time, we got geared up, and we did our expedition groups. They didn't quite function the way these are going to, but it's a different story. Our expedition groups decided that people had been apart because of COVID for far too long, and we wanted to do something, right, Mike? And we went out and we got a truckload of pumpkins, and we gave them away on the front doorsteps of our church. And we said, hey, take a pumpkin and carve it up and send us a picture, and we're going to let people vote on it. We had another one of our expedition groups that handled all the marketing and Facebook stuff and got a bunch of prizes together. Maybe just because we want God's kingdom is a kingdom of joy, it's beauty, it's fun. It's dude, it's community, to bring the best sense of community back to the community that we could. That's what we did. And man, here's the deal. You may think that's really weird, but we have people that have come to our church because of this. And I don't mean just they stopped in one time. I mean we have people sitting in our seats this morning. We have people that are here that have brought the second and third generation of people that are also sitting in seats this morning because of that. You may be here this morning and not even know that your involvement and your sitting here is a part of that because you've been invited by somebody who's been invited by somebody. November's coming up. We fed a group of people. You guys remember that? I think you were part of that. I think Zach was a big part of that, right? Last year, and I don't mean we just did a canned food drive. I mean our expedition group came together and we went all out, man. We bought everything that was needed for this family that was living in an underground shelter. If you guys knew that, but we have not literal underground, but a kind of a secret shelter here in town for some people in different situations. And man, this group came together. We made some connections, and we gave them everything that they needed for this. Christmas last year, we adopted a family. Our expedition group did. Mom was left. Dad died of cancer. Left mom and 4 kids. Mom's struggling to make ends meet at a minimum wage job. English isn't her first language. Man, I loved it watching our people come together. They threw down for Christmas for this family last year. We've actually kept a relationship going with this family. And so, I don't know. We did in-school Nerf night. We did summer movies in the park. We did jazz in the park. And some of these were hits. Some of these were misses. And in the misses, we've learned some things. But we begin to engage in this area of fun and art and community. Because in God's kingdom, those things are there. And they're perfect. And they're made how they should be. And so we want to bring that into our... But that's a reflection of me in a small section of our church. It isn't just that. A full view of the gospel. Some of you have hearts that have this holy discontent for I don't know what, the homeless population or people that are going hungry, people who don't have enough clothing or whatever the case is, these areas and these things, or it may be something completely random and off the books that God is calling you to get involved in. Maybe it's adoption care. Maybe it's I don't know. I'm not creative, right? And so I have a hard time filling in the gaps of what that could be. But I know that if you're a follower of Jesus, that He doesn't leave you where you're at, content with the me and Jesus thing. Not if you're serious. Not if you're legitimate and if you're critical about your faith and how you're going about living that out. He doesn't leave you in that. There are broken pieces that need this. And if you have submitted to and you're living under the authority of the King, then everything around us should begin to reflect that. Relationships, work. We're about to talk for 4 weeks about work, right? Who can talk about work? Everybody can talk about work, right? Everyone talk about that, right? And does the gospel, does that touch work? Yeah, absolutely. In huge ways, right? We're going to go in to that. And how does God's kingdom need to invade me and my work and my view of work? And man, it's awesome. So here's the deal. Again, month of October is coming up. I'll give you an example of how I mean. I want our groups every month, and this is new information even to our hosts and leaders and stuff, so you're all getting it at the same time. Every month, I'm gonna produce questions and everything for our expedition groups every week. But once a month, I want you to put them down. I want you to go out and I want you to go on mission. And maybe that looks like starting a monthly neighborhood dinner, like a get to know your neighborhood dinner, or like an invite the new people in the neighborhood to dinner sort of thing, or something like that. Yeah, I don't know. How can you invite them into a kingdom space? Or maybe it's like for us in my group, here's something like, spoiler alert, guys, I'm going to pitch this to our group. Our neighborhood for Halloween goes all out. So they over in front of Ridgeline. Anybody ever been over there trick-or-treating? Yeah, right. If you know. There's plenty of parking at the school there, and so people come and they pack that parking lot out. They pack all the streets out. Like all of our neighbors, they bring fire pits and everything and grills out front, and we give away like good candy and all this stuff. And it's like, dude, is there an opportunity for us to leverage that? Like legitimately. Like, yeah, dude, why can't our group give out the full-size candy bars this year, right? Like we've got a big giant movie screen. Like, why don't we set that up, man? Why don't we throw a party in our neighborhood, in our block, right? And then like, because guess what? It's like the one time of year that people come to your house, like, and talk to you. There's no other time of the year that people do that. Dude, why can't we be there? When we decked out in our Outpost shirts, and guess what? I got a banner that tells about service times, and that's got a giveaway. So it's like maybe our group, maybe this year, maybe we all pitch in and we get something awesome for a giveaway. And out of that, man, we're able to like reach out and just invite people to church or whatever the case is. I don't know, just thinking out loud here, right? But maybe that's not your thing. Maybe your thing is something completely different, but I know that what is present in this room is a collection of people that God wants to use, like, as we coincide, as we sort of zipper in together to love one another with a big view of the gospel, to go out and to change the world, man. Through the good news. And I don't know. I've seen some near misses. Again, I've seen some things that we've done that have, and don't let that discourage you in your group, because it's going to happen. You're going to do something and you're going to be like, bro, that was a flop, right? What were we thinking about that? Or are you going to do something and there's no tie-in to the gospel, right? There's no ability for you to then take and invite somebody back into your group to experience that kingdom, like God's kingdom reality firsthand. And then you're going to have to go back and you're going to have to rework some things. You're going to have to do some things differently next time. And that's okay, right? That's okay. That's the process, though. Whatever you do, tie it back to the full gospel of the kingdom of God. Justice, needs, joy, celebration, physical space, work, rest, relationships, all of it, right? And there are needs, there are broken places around every single one of those things that I just listed, and 1,000 more that you can engage in as a group. And so this is it. This is where we're headed as a group. And I think that leads us to one of three places today, because I don't really know where you came in here at. Maybe you've sort of settled for this more individual faith, this sort of me and Jesus, right? And maybe you've kind of, this has been the fullest expression of your faith for years, maybe for your entire life. It's been this. It's coming in, it's sitting down, it's good stuff. I sing, I know the words to the song, and I want to, I raise my hands up, and I put a little money in the offering plate, and then out I go, right? And it's like, it isn't a bad thing, but if that's the fullest expression of your faith, then yes, it is. If we've settled for that, and if we've settled and we've somehow we're not diving into deep community with one another, and that's like, man, I encourage you to grow beyond that. And there's an opportunity, right? Our expedition group leaders, like if you guys would, here in just a minute, like go to the back, and we're going to be able to connect you with an opportunity to move beyond that and beyond just this space right here into actual community with one another. So maybe you're stuck there. Maybe you struggle with this issue of loving one another well. Man, I can't tell you how to like white knuckle it and just try harder. I can't tell you how to just pull yourself up and just do that, right? There's no way. I can't give you a list of ways to do that. Like it requires a heart transformed by the gospel. Maybe that's you. Maybe you're hearing this message for the very first time, and you need to take that step to follow Jesus and to experience that love for the very first time. Or third, maybe you have a mission point. Right? You're signed up, you're ready to go, and guess what? Week one of this, I'm I'm going to have this as a question, just spoiler alert, right? Like, there's going to be an opportunity for you guys to begin to brainstorm or to start talking through, because like month of October, somewhere in there, I want all of our groups going out on mission, figuring it out. And you know what? Maybe it's something different every time. Or maybe you guys find something that you guys engage in every single time, right? Or however that works, and there's going to be more to come on that. But maybe you have something in you that's been this area of holy discontent for a really long time. Maybe you need to spend some time and just sort of think about that. Where's that need present in our community? How can I begin to live this out here and now? How could I have that conversation with my expedition group or whatever the case is, right? For us to be able to lead out and to move towards that thing. So again, I don't know where you're at, but I know, and I told you guys this from the beginning, that my whole point in all of this is to drive us into community together. So I really encourage you, if you haven't already signed up for an expedition group, we have one that meets Thursdays, 5:30, I think, 6. One meets at Thursdays at 6. And then all the rest, as of right now, meet Sunday nights at 5:30. So all of our expedition group leaders are about to head to the back here in just a second as I close this out in prayer. If you haven't done that, I encourage you, have a conversation with one of those guys. Let them get signed up. Talk with me. We're leading one at our house. And I encourage you to take that next step, to move beyond just this as the fullest expression of your faith. Everybody good? Good? Dude, it got hot in here. It's weird. All right. I'm going to close this out in prayer. Father God, we love you and we praise you. We thank you for this awesome day. We've come together. We've been able to worship. I just thank you for good news of your kingdom, what that means for me personally, what that means for my relationships, for the world around me, God. Just thank you that your gospel is big and full, and it includes all of creation. Father, I just thank you for the group of people that you've gathered together. Let's pray that we would come together to love one another well over this next few weeks as we figure out how to do community together. Let's pray that you would burden our hearts, God, for different points of mission, things that are broken, things that need healing, things that need love, things that need joy or justice, relationship, community. Let's pray that you would burden our hearts for those things as we engage in that together as a church. Jesus, we ask all this in your precious name. Amen. Awesome. Well, have a great week, guys. Thank you for coming.